already twin tested the two best grown-up hot hatches, the VW Golf R and the Mercedes-AMG A35. Spoiler alert, the Golf just about edged it. They were the best civilized hot hatches. This time, we're looking for the two best uncivilized hot hatches, starting with this, the Honda Civic Type R.
The new arrival is the Renault Sport Megane 300 Trophy. Renault Sport is a master hot hatch builder, but so far, the current generation Megane hasn't hit the same highs as earlier models. The 300 Trophy is the most powerful Megane yet with 300 horsepower, as well as the most sophisticated. It's got four-wheel steering, hydraulic bump stops, trick front suspension, bi-material brakes to save weight, and a limited slip differential. The Renault's interior is unremarkable, but there isn't too much that's actually really wrong with it. The build quality is decent, as are the materials. These £1,500 Recaro seats are supportive but also comfortable. The seating position is okay. The relationship between steering wheel reach and the pedals isn't quite right. The pedals are too close and make your legs feel bunched up. Does the Megane have enough about it to dethrone the Honda Civic Type R, by our reckoning the best handling hot hatch on sale? The mechanical similarities to the Megane run deep. Both are front-wheel drive with mechanical LSDs, both have 4-cylinder turbo engines, although the Civic has a power advantage with 320 horsepower, and both use multi-link rear suspension setups. Both are available with manual transmissions too, although you can specify the Renault with a dual-clutch item if you prefer. The Honda's cabin is busy, but the fit and finish is good enough. Its infotainment system isn't great, but you do get used to it. What's important is the seating position, which is just about spot on. Here are the numbers. There's almost nothing between the two cars in terms of performance. They're within a couple of £100 of one another in terms of price as well, both just under £32,000 basic. The Renault is heavier, but only by 27 kilograms.
We'll start in the Civic Type R and remind ourselves why this car is the class leader, what's so great about it. But before I start driving it with any kind of enthusiasm, I want to talk about some of the day-to-day stuff, because when you leave it in comfort mode, it really is very comfortable. The car has, as standard, adaptive dampers, and there's lots of ground between the softest mode, the middle mode, and the firmest mode. So when you do knock it back into comfort, the ride quality is really actually pretty plush. It's composed, it's settled. It doesn't feel at all jarry or jiggly, and it just means that when you're driving the car day to day, when you're driving it along a motorway or whatever, it's a really easy, comfortable car to operate. But then you get to a soggy mountain road like this one and you want to stick it into sport mode, so we'll do that. And then the ride just firms up a little bit, but it's still fluid, it's still pliant. And actually the chassis, over a cresting, bumpy, tricky British road, such as the one we're on now, the chassis works beautifully. And the tyres claw massive grip out of the road surface. What's really clever about this car, and what impressed me from the moment I first drove one a couple of years ago, is that you start driving it and right away you feel on top of the car, you feel in tune with the car, and you start driving it neatly, with precision, you start driving it confidently, you just start driving it well. And that's because it's such an intuitive car, it's such an easy car to read. The steering, for instance, is really detailed. It feels so directly connected to the front axle, and you have a real sense of exactly what the front wheels are up to. And it just means that from the first mile onwards, you drive the car as hard as you can. That, for me, is a sign of a really well-sorted performance car. The steering's fantastic, really natural rate response and natural weight as well. It's got so much grip, even in these slightly damp conditions. The grip is enormous, the differential works beautifully. It's a really neutral chassis balance as well, so it doesn't feel like it's pushing massively. It doesn't feel like it's going to snap into oversteer. It all works beautifully. And then the powertrain, well, that's just fantastic as well. It's a really strong engine, this one. It's a bit of a powerhouse, and it revs to beyond 7,000 RPM, so it's so strong. Lovely manual gear shift, one of the best in the business. And that really tight torque differential that puts the power down beautifully. Yeah, it all means that this car is fantastic to drive. Frustrations, well, there have to be some, and that's the Plus R mode. That's when the powertrain is at its liveliest, when you get the sharpest response. So you want to be able to use that when you're driving along a mountain road, but then the dampers are moved into their firmest setting. You can't decouple the dampers from the powertrain in plus R mode. And actually the chassis still works, but it's just too busy, it's just a bit too frantic. The chassis in sport mode just works better, it feels more pleasant on a typically bumpy road. And so it just means that you never really use the plus R mode on the road. It's only if you find yourself on an unusually smooth road or on a racetrack that you ever use it. Honda's engineers will tell you that that's not a problem, that they've got it right, they know best. For me, it is a problem. But I can overlook it because in sport mode, it's not as though you're missing throttle response, it's not as though the engine doesn't feel lively, and in that mode, the chassis just works so well. It's basically impossible to review the Honda Civic Type R without talking about the way it looks. I'm not going to tell you what you should think of the way it looks. I know lots of people actually like the styling of this car. I just don't happen to be one of them. For me, that's compounded by the fact that I think the Megane Trophy looks fantastic.
But this contest won't be won or lost on styling alone. For the 300 Trophy to come away with a belt around its waist, it'll need to be better to drive than the Type R, a very tall order.
It's so interesting to jump directly from that Civic into this Megane, because they actually feel quite different, so similar on paper, but they do feel very different. This car doesn't have adaptive dampers, and it really is pretty uncompromising in terms of the way it rides. It's such a focused car. But one of the most prominent differences, maybe the thing you notice second after the ride quality, is this car's steering. And the Megane doesn't really steer anything like as well as that Civic. So the Honda has got really accurate, really predictable, really intuitive steering. As I said, it makes you feel connected to the car right away. But this Megane, it's got springy, vague, slightly odd steering that just makes you feel disconnected from the car straight away. So it takes a little while for you to tune into it and learn to trust the front axle, particularly when it's a little bit slippery outside. But you do get used to it, and you do realise that the front end has got bucket loads of grip, just like that Civic. So this car's chassis, it really is focused. It means you've got a connected ride quality, a busy ride quality, and day to day, that might be too much for some people. I find it tolerable actually. On the motorway through town, I do find it tolerable. It's firm, it's connected, but I don't find it unbearably crashy or really stiff. What it does mean is that when you start throwing the car around a little bit, it feels hyper agile. You've got such immediate responses, such taut body control, and you really can fling it along with massive commitment and masses of confidence. There are a couple of other similarities to the Civic. It's got a really tightly wound differential in this Megane, so you can put the power down and use the throttle to drag you out of a corner really positively. I like that a lot. And it's also got a neutral chassis balance, not too understeery, not too oversteery. Again, that gives you confidence. It's such a quick car along a road, this one. I think this Megane's engine sounds better. It's probably exhaust trickery that's doing it, but there's just a more vocal, raughty, sports car-like exhaust note. The engine, I think it's livelier, it's more energetic than the Honda's. It doesn't rev quite as high, but it seems to rev out more quickly. It just doesn't have quite the muscle through the mid-range that the Type R's motor has got. In the same way that you can't review the Civic without mentioning the way it looks, you also can't review this Megane Trophy without talking about four-wheel steer, four-control Renault calls it. It's proven to be massively complicated along lots of my car reviewer colleagues. Me, I have to say, I think it's much ado about nothing. In sport mode, four control only really influences the way the car feels, only makes the car feel more agile, more nervous, a bit more aggressive, below 37 miles per hour in most of the drive modes. And when you're going for a spirited drive, you're well above 37 miles an hour most of the time. It's only in race mode that it really has an impact, so I'll stick it into race mode now. And then, four control, the four-wheel steering system, works slightly differently. It then turns the rear axle wheels in the opposite direction to the front makes the wheelbase effectively shorter, makes the car more agile, more responsive, a bit more nervous on turning, up to 62 miles per hour. So then you do start to feel it doing its thing a little bit more. And it's pretty prominent. The moment you flick the steering wheel, turn into a corner, you get this sense of the car darting in a kind of excited, nervous kind of way. It's exaggerated. It makes the car feel much more agile, like it's really darting and nipping into corners. The feeling you get from the driver's seat, the way it feels, is as though it's got a really, really quick steering rack. So you turn into a corner, normal amount of steering lock, and then it darts in this exaggerated, excitable kind of way. So it does feel a little bit unusual. For me, for control, it's not the big deal that it's really made out to be. Does this car get away without having adaptive dampers? I think it does, just about. So when you're going for a bit of a spirited drive, the car feels busy, it feels connected, but it's dealing with the road surface beneath you really nicely. The body isn't skipping about violently and the wheels aren't coming away from the ground. It's more of an issue in terms of ride comfort and everyday driving, and I think for some people this car will be too tough, it will be unyielding. For me, actually, I don't mind it. So both the Megane and the Civic, on the right road, they are fantastic to drive. The big thing for me, one of the things that really separates the two cars is steering. The Honda steers beautifully, the Renault Sport not quite so much.
You'll have your own view on the way these cars look, so I won't let that figure in my verdict. Both are fantastic to drive across a mountain road, but with more configurability in its suspension and better steering, the Civic Type R is the more talented car. It's also far more capable in day-to-day use. That means the Honda has a breadth of ability the Renault can't match, which is why the Type R wins this contest. Which of these two cars would you choose? Let us know in the comments, and while you're down there, please give this video a thumbs up as well. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the PistonHeads YouTube channel and turn on notifications. Oh, one more thing. Check out PistonHeads.com. Forums, classifieds, car news, reviews, opinion pieces, it's all there.